Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. Another Arnold Classic weekend has come and gone. This weekend we saw what will probably be the best show in Europe this season, the Arnold Classic UK. This was more or less a rerun of the Arnold Ohio 2 weeks prior, but it was still a very competitive show in some divisions and we had some big names in the show, and that's always exciting. So in case you missed it or just need a concise and timely recap, here's the video for you. Here's my recap of every men's division at this year's Arnold Classic UK. I'll be covering the top 5s in the men's and classic physique divisions and the full lineup for the open division. There's really nothing else for me to say. We have several guys to cover, so let's just jump into the video. If you guys like this video and want to see more, be sure to hit that like button and then subscribe. I do these recaps after every single pro show, so if you want to stay up to date on what's happening in the world of bodybuilding, subscribe to my channel so you never miss my recaps and other coverage. Let's start with men's physique. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time here. I don't follow this division super closely. I may start though because I have gotten several requests to do so maybe I'll start covering this division more thoroughly. In 5th was Mahmoud El Maghrabi. In 4th was Clarence McSpadden. 3rd was Vitor Chavez. And the runner-up spot was Diogo Montenegro. And winning the men's physique title for the 2024 Arnold Classic UK was, first, Corey Morris. We definitely got a little mix-up in the placings here. I want to congratulate all these guys on their placings, and of course I want to congratulate Corey on his victory here at the Arnold UK. Now let's jump over to what was the most competitive division in my opinion, classic physique. We had our same top 5 from Ohio minus Ramon, and there was one slight mix-up. But I do feel that even though the placings may not have changed a whole lot, I think everyone got a lot closer in the UK versus the Arnold Ohio. Anyway, in 5th you had Emmanuel Riccardi. Not too much to say here. I think this is unfortunately where the competition fell off into a second tier, but I did like this guy's physique for sure. In 4th, you had Michael de Bull. Michael brings really great muscularity. He's arguably overdeveloped for this division. His back was the second best on stage. It's really good, and he really doesn't have a pose that's super weak. And of course, his conditioning was top notch as always. He peaked a lot better here in the UK as well. He was fuller and more conditioned. And with the conditioning and the muscularity, those things get him pretty far. He's just missing the classic shape of the other guys. I like him a lot. If we were just judging the show on bodybuilding qualities, he probably would have won. But this is classic, and that classic shape needs to be there in spades. And for Michael, he was the least classic in the top 4. This was a great package and a strong showing for him though. Taking the bronze medal was Urs Kalasinski. Now we're getting into a little controversy. Urs was the most improved classic physique guy from the Arnold Ohio. In Ohio, he was flat, so he didn't really have any pop to his muscles, and he looked small. And being flat hurt his conditioning too. He looked smooth. He didn't have his trademark details. Here in the UK, it was such a better peak. Everything was more filled out. I think the arms, while still pretty weak, were improved, as was the back. And the legs, they were crazy. Honestly, maybe even a little too much. He looked a little bottom heavy. But those were some great wheels nonetheless. Now in Ohio, he placed ahead of Brian, and I gotta be honest, I didn't agree there, and most people didn't. However, I think Urs improved so much that there was certainly an argument for him placing second. I even saw a few people saying Urs should have won. And for my personal decision while I was watching the Arnold, I had Urs placing second, but I did have a feeling Brian would end up taking the runner-up title. So definitely expect a video on Urs and Brian coming very soon. All in all, I think Urs was very improved, maybe worthy of second place, and if you ask me, definitely worthy. At minimum, he should be very happy with the big improvements he was able to make in such a short amount of time. Taking the runner-up spot was Brian Ainsley. This was by far Brian's best placing in quite a while. Personally, I think he was slightly worse here than Ohio, at least at prejudging, and really only in the legs. I think here in the UK they really didn't have the fullness at prejudging, but he did fill them out more at finals as he typically does. The upper body was still incredible though. I think from the waist up he beat Urs pretty convincingly, and for the judges that happened to be enough this time. Although I do kind of feel that this was a little payback for him getting robbed in Ohio. Overall, I still think Brian has gotten a lot better with the new pounds added to his weight cap. He's definitely bringing better packages, and like I said, he hasn't placed this high at a show in a while. And beating Urs, the current 3rd in the world, is no small feat, especially because the judges have seemingly been pushing Brian out of this division. This placing does give me a little more hope for Brian's near future. And in first place for the classic physique division was Wesley Vissers. Wesley has now made it 2 for 2 with these Arnold titles. He won in Ohio 2 weeks ago just by 1 point against Ramon Dino. And like I said at the beginning, I think this division was close, but at the same time, maybe not. I think Wesley was really the most complete and had the overall best package that day. He was shredded, even more so than Ohio according to himself, but I did like the Arnold Ohio package just a little more. But really, there wasn't much change at all. Honestly, it was probably just a difference in lighting. So not only was he shredded, but he was huge. As I've said before, he just seems to carry a lot more mass compared to the other guys. And of course, he towered over most of the competition, being the tallest guy on the stage. And he was the most complete. Everything except the hamstrings were good. Brian was missing quads and his chest was a little flat, and Urs was missing arms and back. So really, Wesley was leading the pack the entire time in my opinion, but it was still close enough that subjectivity could play a role here. Really, all these top 3 guys had compelling arguments to win. But there can only be one winner, and this time around, winning the classic physique division at the 2024 Arnold UK was Wesley Vissers. I want to congratulate congratulate him on his now 2 Arnold titles, and I also want to extend a congratulations to the rest of the Classic Physique top 5. The Open division turned out to be quite the good lineup, even though we lost a couple of guys from the Ohio Arnold, but most of them ended up rematching in Birmingham. We only had 7 competitors, but they were all great guys, and even last place in this lineup really wasn't a loss. Anyway, since there were only 7 competitors, I'm going to go over the entire lineup for you, starting with 7th, Antoine Vaillant. Antoine did end up taking the very back spot, but again, that doesn't really say much. I think all these guys did pretty well. This was a stacked lineup and someone has to take last. I don't think Antoine really did too much wrong, but I think he was better in Ohio. He had a much better peak in Ohio on both nights. He got better at the UK night show, but the problems he had at prejudging were still kinda there. I think he was fairly flat, which caused him not to look as full and not as crisp either. He brought a lot more details to Ohio, and that's what allowed him to do so well there. But this was still a leveled up Antoine compared to what we were seeing at his last showings 2 years ago. And he only got beat by one additional guy here that he didn't get beat by in Ohio. So not too much change for Antoine in terms of placings if you really think about it. In 6th, we had Mo Shaban. Beating out Antoine, we had Mo, but looking back, I don't really know how he did this. I didn't realize how short Mo was, and next to Antoine and James, 2 taller guys, they were dwarfing Mo. And no, Mo wasn't really super complete. He had gaps just like Antoine did. So maybe Mo should have taken 7th. I think so, but I'm not super upset about it either way. Mo was just kind of there, to be honest. He still needs some more overall size, particularly in the upper body and from the rear, and his conditioning wasn't exactly exceptional. It was okay, but I think we've seen better from Mo. Overall, I was more wowed and impressed with Antoine, but in this lineup, not being last is a fairly big deal, so props to Mo for at least proving that to the judges. In 5th, we had James Hollingshead. Rounding out the top 5, we had the Shed. So both of his Arnold packages were pretty comparable. He was a bit drier though at the Arnold UK. Now this really didn't alleviate his main problems, which besides the peaking issue are genetic issues. Things like the poorer arms, narrow clavicles, and his extremely shallow abs. His abs are maybe his biggest detriment. His stomach always looks washed out, and it's actually not. He's not watery, it's just his abs have zero definition. And then of course there is the peaking issue. Was this the best James ever? I don't think so. I think the best James ever is still back in 2020 with the 2 shows he did that year, or maybe even the 2022 Tsunami Pro, but I don't exactly think this was a bad James either. But I'm now at the point that I'm just assuming this is his new ceiling. At this point, his best shows are pretty far outliers because the majority of his shows were poor because he was either leaning into being too full or too flat and stringy. This was definitely on the higher end of James' spectrum. This was a good James for sure, but I think this is going to be kind of his new normal. What you see is probably what you'll get from now on. But keep in mind, this is with him self-prepping and peaking, so maybe he can build a good relationship with a coach and unlock a new level to his physique. It's definitely possible, he's done it before. But until then, I'm going to be expecting more packages like this from James. A very good peak, but not so good that he's able to outwork a lot of the more genetically gifted guys that happen to peak better. He was still massive, and that's pretty crazy to see, but I'm still waiting to see him bring it all together. Still, top 5 at this Arnold and top 6 at the Arnold Ohio were pretty good for James in my opinion. In 4th, we had John De La Rosa. This is John's second 4th place finish in a row, and that basically sums up John's entire performance here. He was beat by 3 guys in Ohio when he was beat by 3 guys here, and he did very well at prejudging but a little worse at finals here, just like he did in Ohio. Overall, I think John is a very consistent guy, and I'm sure he wanted to be a little higher, but for John, this is a terrific placing. He was one of the more complete guys there and brought good conditioning in the prejudging especially. I just think everyone in front of him, especially those top 2 spots, were just in a tier above John, mainly because of their size and wow factor. And those things will make more sense when we talk about who actually placed ahead of John. Cracking that top 3 was Akeem Williams. Akeem was definitely benefited by having a trial run at the Arnold Ohio, then 2 weeks between shows to tighten up. This was one of the best Akeems we've seen in a while for sure. In Ohio, he only really looked super good at finals, but in the UK, I think he looked pretty good on both days. I would still say finals here in the UK was a better version for him. He just seems to have an easier time peaking for that second day, whatever it is. Overall, this was about as good as he can do, and quite frankly, as good as anyone else can do. The next 2 guys are top 3 Olympians, and one of them was Mr. Olympia. And Akeem may compare well in a couple of shots, but overall he's just not on the next 2 guys' level. But with that said, he did take what was probably the most fought for spot. 1 and 2 weren't super competitive if you ask me. And even if they were, I think the battle for 3rd, while not as flashy, was still very competitive. More so actually. Akeem was able to improve on his Arnold Ohio package and move up in placings. And Akeem, with his monster level of size and decent shape in some shots, combined with a finally good peak, allowed him to get his best placing in years. And we had the same top 2 from the Arnold Ohio, spoiler alert, so in 2nd was Samson Dauda. Samson came into the show with a lot of baggage, for lack of a better term. After the Arnold Ohio, we all said he was good, he just had one main issue. He needed to be sharper, maybe 5 to 10% sharper, not a whole lot. He literally has everything else, so we were saying that just a slightly sharper Samson could have won the Arnold Ohio. But we saw a pretty standard Samson instead, which is pretty good, but not good enough. But he took these criticisms very personally and started going online, and he said he felt personally attacked, yada yada yada. yada, but then he capped off that rant by saying his body, and I quote, felt like it was shutting down. So there was clearly something up with Samson, but then he went to the doctor, got some antibiotics, rehydrated, and the next day he was back on the saddle and he said he was definitely in for the Arnold UK. But he was going to do this show without the help of his coach, Milo Sarshev, because all in that same day, Samson decided to drop his coach seemingly out of nowhere. I'm not going to comment too much on that situation itself, I don't have time in this video, but long story short, the 2 weeks in between the Arnold Ohio and the UK were pretty hectic for Samson. But luckily for him, he had the advantage of having his wife prep him before. She peaked him for the 2023 Romania and Prague Pros, in fact. So when he left his coach, he wasn't scrambling to find someone last minute that doesn't know his body. And his wife was already there, obviously, so he just went with her to peak him for the show. His wife may not be the best long-term choice because that's Samson's spouse, and that usually never works. But for this show, it's definitely what he should have done. And we can't say it didn't work, but it certainly didn't go poorly. Samson still wasn't shredded like we wanted him to be, but he was still better, full stop. And this was mainly from an improvement in conditioning. Was he better in that regard at the UK? Yes. Does he need more though? Yes. Especially because of who first place ended up being. Samson also didn't have the major stomach issues that he did in Ohio. It was still a minor issue in UK, but he was somewhat more cognizant of keeping his stomach in check. Now his quads were down in size a little bit, but that's probably just a result of more cardio not being as full. Since he had quads to spare, I see it as a worthy trade-off for a little bit more conditioning. So going into the show, I thought Samson was DOA. I thought there was no way he was going to defeat Hadi. And then after all those things came out about Samson and seeing him all over the place, I thought there was absolutely no way he could win. But even with the deck stacked against him, he actually managed to make this closer than it was in Ohio. And this is largely because he got better, so props to Samson. He had a lot of drama and baggage heading into the show, but he ended up narrowing the gap between him and first. And speaking of first place, like I said, this was the same outcome as the Arnold Ohio, so most of you will know by now that taking the first place spot was Hadi Chupin. So really, what is there to say? Was it closer than it was in Ohio? Sure. But again, that's more because Samson stepped his own game up. Hadi may have been a few percent worse, mainly at prejudging, but for getting to the show with like 24 hours out, he really wasn't as off as you'd might expect. But that's Hadi, he really never is. And he really wasn't off by that much at all. That's why the narrowing of the gap really had more to do with Samson's improvements, I feel. And keep in mind, it still wasn't exactly a split decision. Out of the 5 judges that were counted for the final score, just 1 had Samson ahead at both prejudging and finals. And if you ask most fans, it was even more decisive than that. It was like Ohio all over again when Hadi came out. I personally said it was game over. Hadi, yet again, had so much more quality to him compared to Samson. It isn't a contest when it comes to detail and conditioning and things like that. And with a smaller waist and bigger quads, he's cutting a less blocky outline than he used to, which intrudes on Samson's would-be decisive victory in shape. I did get a little worried for Hadi at the end there because everyone kept saying it was close. That's actually what Bob Chick said the judges had said, but it turns out not really. And I agree with my initial thoughts and basically everyone else. Closer than it was in Ohio, but there was still a big gap between these two. Hadi has made some crazy improvements since the Olympia, and he kept them intact from Ohio. And that was all he needed to get his second Arnold Classic title in just 2 weeks. I want to congratulate the rest of the Open Division and really everyone who competed this weekend. And of course, I saved my biggest congratulations for now the Arnold Classic Ohio champion, Arnold UK champion, heck, even the Mr. Olympia, and who knows, maybe again. Of course, I'm talking about the Persian Wolf, Hadi Chupin. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. What was your favorite division this weekend, and what do you think of the results of each division? Let me know down in the comments. And if you guys like these recap videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. I do these recaps after every single major pro show, so if you like staying up to date on the world of bodybuilding, subscribe so you never miss a recap. By the way, if you guys are looking for any high quality supplements, the ones I use personally in fact, head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. With all that said, I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexi, yeah.